Wondering how your mindset affects your life? How to bring more energy into your business and life? Millions of people around the world ask these same questions daily. You are in the right place. Learn practices that will help give your life the meaning and success you've been searching for. Welcome to the Charge Podcast, teaching you how to create habits around real goals every day. Practical life advice from those who made it. Here's your host, Gary Wilbers.
Welcome, Chargers. We're glad to have you back again this week for another great podcast. I love sharing information with you from our different guests and their different viewpoints. And with it being the start of 2020, yes, it's still the start of 2020 because I believe anytime you're in first quarter, it is the start of 2020. So it's a new year, but remember, it's not only a new year, it's a new decade. So what action have you been taking each day to progress in your life? Remember the acronym CHARGE, create habits around real goals every day? Well, the thing is, you had that momentum at the beginning of the year. What are you doing now to keep that momentum going? Well, today we're going to give you a guest to help you think about this, how you can keep bringing that joyful mindset to yourself. So today's guest is Dave Caperton. He speaks and writes about the benefits of a joyful mindset and the power of one person to affect cultural change with small actions that meet emotional needs, build trust, and lead to more individual happiness and less stress. He is presented for over 800 business, healthcare, education, and government organizations across the United States and Canada. Before beginning his business as a speaker, executive coach, and performance consultant, Dave was an award-winning educator and also wrote and performed stand-up comedy. Dave, it is great to have you on the Charge Podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Gary. I'm very pleased to be here, and Happy New Year.
Well, thank you for joining us, and it is such a great message that you share, and I can't wait to get in that because I love talking about mindset too, so we're going to have a great conversation. But before we go there, I ask every guest the same question, and it's my mantra. I call it CHARGE, and I even have bracelets wrote out on it that says, create habits around real goals every day. What habit or habits do you think has led success in your life, Dave?
Well, I think if you had to come down to just a couple of them, the first one is you tend to get what you focus on. So I try to be aware of what's my focus. What's the focus? That's a matter of what we choose. And so, we don't always get what we want, but what we focus on, that we tend to approach and to realize. So that's one. And then the power of words. I think when you change your words, you change your world. And so when we use our words, we use a lot of times the kind of words that are going to create the reality. I mean, you're a person of faith. I know that, Gary, and you know that the word becomes flesh. Mm-hmm. And I think that when we use words carefully, when we use words to try to create the results we're after, we're going to consistently create the kind of results that we paint with our words, that we form with our words. We speak it into existence.
Well, I love that. That is so true. And I love what you talk about focus because it is the early part of 2020. And I think sometimes we lose our focus. And one thing about the end of a year, it's always a reset. But when you start out a new year, some people think they can't move forward. And I think that's really that focus. And then it's the power of telling themselves that they're capable of doing that. And right. I think it really fits in our conversation that we're going to share today because kind of my first question for you is talking about this power of one. Can you give me maybe an example of how one person can make a real difference in a problem or a situation that starts to affect a lot of people?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's just take something that we all can relate to, something that nobody likes, and that is when you find yourself stuck in traffic. I was with, I remember when I was about 15 years old, and I was getting close to that time when I was thinking, I'm going to get my driver's license, Well, my dad was a salesman, and as a salesperson, he traveled. He had 3 states that were his territory, and he traveled constantly. He was constantly driving. So he probably put on a couple of million miles over the course of his 40 years doing that. And so we're in traffic one day, and we're on this long backup, this jam. And my dad turned to me and he said, "I'm going to show you how to solve a traffic jam." And I thought he was joking. I'm waiting for the punchline, Yeah. So what's the joke here? And then I saw he's serious. He's absolutely serious. He thinks he can solve a traffic jam from where he is, stuck in the middle of all this stuff. And so he said, "You got to do two things." He said, "Stay off the brake and make room." And that was his advice. And so he starts backing off. And of course, what happens when you back off in a traffic jam? People start cutting into that open space, And the people behind him, they weren't happy. They still were honking their horns, flashing their lights. And I'm going, "Dad, this isn't fair. These people are cutting in." He said, "Nah, it'll work." And he just kept doing it. Pretty soon we're up to speed. And I said, he said, "There, you see?" I said, "Well, yeah, but how do I know that wouldn't have happened anyway?" And then about 2 years ago, I pick up the Wall Street Journal. I'm in a hotel for a speaking event that I was doing. In the morning, they have the Wall Street Journal out. I'm thumbing through, and all of a sudden, I see this headline: "One driver can prevent a traffic backup." And it's exactly the approach that he talked about. Backing off, making room, letting other people cut in freely. And I thought, isn't that interesting that one person stuck in the middle of a traffic jam could actually help solve that traffic jam? But here's the mindset change that it requires. And this is leadership 101 as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
You're not going to get thanked necessarily. The people around you may always believe that, you're part of the problem. They're not going to necessarily be as enlightened as you are. The other thing is you're going to have to set aside who's going to benefit, whether or not it's fair. Because a lot of times when you solve a problem, if you're focused on solving a problem, it means there are going to be some people who unfairly benefit from the solution. If you get hung up on that, you're not going to get to the solution. So that's, to me, the power of one person in even that common situation. Man, we're more powerful than we realize if we're willing to have the right mindset and take the right actions.
Yeah, and it becomes the real key is that individual saying, "Yes, I want to, and that I will, and that I'm willing to
Yes.
move forward." I think that becomes the real key. And when I speak to audiences, a lot of time, Dave, I'll ask how many people in the room is a leader. Now, I didn't ask them by title or anything else. I said, "Are you a leader?" And of course, you'll get, depending on the audience, I had Missouri police chiefs a few months ago, and I had about 75, 80% of the room. But normally, it's probably 25, 30% top.
Sure.
Because they think of only as what? Their title.
Right.
And I said, wrong. We're all leaders, because first we have to lead ourselves. And that's what your Power of One is talking about. How can we lead ourselves? Then we help others lead them by doing it in our actions. It's there every time. And I think it's so important that we understand leadership starts with us.
Right. And it starts exactly where you are. Arthur Ashe, the great tennis, first African-American to win a Grand Slam tennis title, won it 5 times. And then he contracted AIDS when he was up for a heart operation and received a blood transfusion. They didn't know to screen for it back at that time. And so it was a death sentence. So he spent the remaining time that he had raising money and awareness. And somebody interviewed him near the end of his life. They said, "Now you really have made an impact on the world. You've changed the world. But you were a sports icon, a beloved hero of this sport, a celebrity. How can somebody who's not got that kind of pedigree, doesn't have that kind of recognition, how do we do it?" And his answer was just as eloquent and beautiful and simple. And it's become the advice that I try to keep in mind every day. He said, "Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can." And it's so simple. And I think, hey, that's leadership. Right where you are with what you already have to do what you can, and you can make a difference.
Yeah. Make a difference with your family. Make a difference with your coworkers. Each one of those. We all had intentions at the beginning of this year. We wanted to do something. Start right where you're at today.
Right.
And move forward. Well, this really sets us up for kind of the next message that I wanted to really ask you about was, people want to really put this message of that individual empowerment and the value of that joyful mindset into action, what is one of the most effective things that they can do to take action to make it move forward?
Well, I think, first of all, you have to check your focus. What are you focused on? Because if you're not getting what you want out of your work, out of the people that you're working with, you're serving, or the people around you, even your family, I'm not saying that it's your fault, but it is a good place to start to check, hey, what am I focused on? And so our focus that's the first step. A couple of years ago, I came to the end of the year and I thought, you know what, I'm going to buy myself. I was so tired of computers that got maxed out, and they were always, giving me messages that the memory was full. So I went to the Apple store and I said, man, I'm getting the big one. I want the maximum hard drive. I am going all in. You want the Apple Care? Yes, I do. I want everything. And so I got it all set up and I took it home, and it was great for a couple of weeks. One day I sat down and I tried to start it up. No chime, no lights, nothing. And I tried everything that I knew to do. And finally I called the Apple Care line, and the rep got on there, and the CSR, and I said, hey, this thing is a paperweight and it costs me thousands of dollars. So he said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's do a safe start. That didn't work. All right, I want you to hold down the command key, the option key, control key, the delete key, the escape key. Now, with your nose, push the enter key. And everything. I was just getting more and more irritated. And finally said, okay, you know what? I'll set you up for an appointment at the Genius Bar. He said, but before I do that, sir, he said, I kind of hesitate to ask this, but are you sure it's plugged in? And I said, what kind of an idiot? Why don't you just say, okay, boomer? So what do you mean? Am I sure it's plugged in? You think that I would have? And I suddenly looked at it and I said, oh my gosh, it's not plugged in. Dad had run behind it and popped it out of the wall. I never looked there. And so I thought, focus is sort of like that. We sometimes try to solve every problem without checking to see, hey, are we focused on the positive? Are we focused on possibility? Are we focused on, or are we focused on the negatives? Are we focused on our problems? Are we focused on our challenges and our obstacles? Check focus first. That's a good place to start.
I think you're so right there, because that focus really allows us. And then when you talk about where before you talked about the power of the words, if you are building yourself up, you're more likely to achieve things. It's a known fact. And if you are that type of leader with, let's say, your children, and you have small children or any children, and if you're building them up, you're building them up with the power of your words. But just the opposite happens if we tear them down, our coworkers, any of us. And I do an exercise that shows that each time, how we can lose our strength just by the words people use. And I know you talk a lot about that with when you're speaking. Can you share how that you think those words affect people?
Sure. I mean, words just, they shape our reality. We always hear that perception is what? It's our reality. So the way we express our experience is in the words we choose. There's a doctor in University of Texas at Austin, and he published a paper about how patients of his, when they used words, positive words, to talk about their health, even if their health wasn't excellent, when they were having challenges. And what he discovered in his research was that people who use positive words to talk about their health, they responded more readily to treatment. They even recovered from injury more quickly than people who use negative words. So somebody could say, instead of saying I'm sick, I'm ill, I feel bad. He said, that's a reality, but it's a negative expression of that reality. But people said, I'm not very well right now. I'm not as healthy as I would like to be. I'm just not in a place where I have my health. He said, health, well, these are positive words. And he said, what happens is something clicks in our brains and our bodies working together, that even that word has a significant impact on our health and our ability to recover from illnesses. It expresses the exact same reality. It's just as a choice. And so I think, well, if we've got solid evidence and data to back up that words affect how healthy we are and how we can maintain our health and how we can recover our health, what else is possible if we use the right words?
Yeah, and I think that's the key, is especially as we're new into a year, people wanted to make changes. They're trying to make those habits. Use the power of the words. I mean, affirmations, telling yourself, live into something that you want to be. If you want to be a more positive person, you have to decide to make that and move forward that. And then you have to change some things in your life to be able to make that happen. And I think one of the keys that for some of us, and I feel like I had a struggle with this in the past, is it didn't bring enough humor into my life. And I know you love to use humor in your programs. So as I was researching you and looking at some of your videos, your audiences are laughing all the time, but you're making points and it's helping them remember them. So can you share the value of that sense of humor and what some benefits that really humor provides us as an individual?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one of the greatest uses of humor, one of the greatest functions of humor is it gives us a choice. We can reframe our reality with humor. One time I was speaking for a group of cancer survivors, and man, I was nervous about this group because I thought, look, they're not talking about a culture change. They're not talking about downsizing or some kind of new leadership coming in. They're talking about life and death. And I haven't been in their shoes. And so as I watch the people walk in the room, I'm nervous because I'm thinking, I believe that humor has an important role to play in wellness, but are they going to receive that from me? I haven't been where they've been. And I watched a woman come in the room, and she had her head wrapped in a scarf to hide the effects of the treatment she was undergoing, and a T-shirt that she had something printed on. I couldn't read from where I was up at the front of the room. But people around her, she was kind of a celebrity, you could see, among this group. They knew her. They wanted to be close to her. There was laughter around this woman. And I thought, there's just a sense of joy, and other people are drawn to that, right? And I watched her. She really got my attention. And when she got close enough, I remember I read the T-shirt, and it said, "Hair by Chemo." And I laughed at that. I was like, huh. And then I stopped. I kind of went, oh, I'm making a chemo joke. I don't know if that's funny at all. But what I realized was, look, she didn't have a lot of control over what was happening in her body. But what she did do was she made a distinction between what was the life and death part of it and what was just a temporary side effect. And the loss of her hair was something that happened and as soon as the chemo round ended, her hair would begin to grow. So she used humor as a way of coping, see? And so that made an impression on me. And 5 years later, I had a chance to meet her quite by accident. I was speaking at a Christmas tree lighting ceremony that I was invited to present for. So I told the story. I'd learned her name was Barbara. And I told this quick little story about what an inspiration it was to me, that the use of humor, how she did that. And one person stayed behind. This woman came up to me and she said, "I loved hearing that story." And I said, "Well, you know what? It's really helped me get my perspective. And I know it's helped some of the audiences I've shared it with." She says, "Well, the reason I like this so much is because I'm Barbara." And I looked at this woman and she looked like the picture of health. And I said, "So you're well?" She said, "No, listen, I'm still a cancer survivor. I know that any time it could come back." She goes, "And I got to tell you something. Some days that overwhelms me. Some days I just can't cope." She said, "But most days I get up and I start thinking about all the wonderful people who have been part of this journey, the doctors, the nurses, my family, my friends, the outpouring of love." She said, "And I find my smile, I find my laughter, I find my humor." She said, "And I'm here today." And I think that's part of the reason why. And so I think, wow, humor is it is that. But it also gives us a choice, for those of us not facing things that are quite that big a deal. Just in every day, from that traffic jam we just talked about to the frustration of conflicts with families, and friends and colleagues that you're working with, and sometimes the people at work who just don't have the same priorities that you do. Humor gives us a choice to choose amusement over anger. And that's just a less stressful experience. When I can cultivate my sense of humor and find a little of the absurd in it and find a way to laugh at what otherwise might make me angry, I'm less stressed. I'm in a better position to create some consensus. And, that's just to me, a more positive way to live and work.
Yeah, it really changes the outlook. And when you're in tough situations, pressure situations, especially in business, when there's that humor there and people can work together on that, it makes that stress not feel like the same amount of stress. Versus if you're in that very contentious environment, it actually creates less productivity. I get into productivity some in performance. And what happens is that individual is not going to perform as well. But one of the challenges comes in, Dave, and I'm kind of curious from your side of it, because I know you use humor a lot, but sometimes humor can come with risk. We all know that. Yeah. And in these days, it seems more than ever that we offend people. And we can offend one side, and we are very much a divisive country, and it becomes a real challenge. So are there caveats that you could share how you manage some of those risks?
Absolutely. Humor is just because it has so many different facets. It has so many applications. It has so many different forms that it takes. We're living, and I know I hear a lot of people who use humor professionally, comedians and humorous speakers and all, and they'll sometimes grouse about this political correctness and all that. But I'm thinking, first of all, most of this just comes from being a little more aware of what we at one time didn't worry about. I think I was looking at a cartoon the other day with two men talking to each other, and one says, I like the old days when men were men and women were willing to put up with us, and I think, some of it is just, look, the world is changing. We are becoming a more diverse culture. So we have to work with a little more of that in mind. And that's actually, I think, a good exercise to be aware that, look, there's some sensitivity. So yes, there are some caveats. One is, I always think of humor and the use of it as being something that you use with a permit, with a license. And there are people who will sometimes, they'll come into a situation where they're not on the inside. See, that's one of the things that humor does. It defines a boundary. People can joke about what's on the inside, whoever belongs on the inside of that circle. And I was speaking recently out in Oklahoma, and I had in the audience lots of first responders. And so I had firefighters, and I was asking them to share a funny story. And one of them told me, he said, I can't share some of the stories that make us laugh. And he told me privately what they were. And I said, you're absolutely right. That's some grisly stuff. And then I found the same thing with trauma nurses. And I said, well, here's the thing. Humor is like a dialect that you speak within that little community. And the key is that helps you cope. It's a way that you kind of keep your sanity by seeing things that are sometimes very disturbing and would really offend the sensibilities of people outside of your professional group. So it's necessary within that. The key is make sure that you're only sharing that safely within that group, because if it's an earshot of somebody who is not on that inside circle, they're not going to get it. And they're going to think you're callous, and they're going to think you're uncaring. They don't know you're just trying to cope and keep your sanity. So that's one. And I think another one is simply this. If you don't belong on the inside of that group, then you don't have that license. I've heard people talk about, well, these people in this group, and I made some little joke, and they joke among themselves all the time. But as soon as I said it, all heck broke loose. It was horrible. And I think, well, yeah, because you're not on the inside of that group. You don't possess that license. So I think that's maybe just one way of thinking about it is, do I have the license to be able to joke freely with this group. If I'm a member of that group, I'm on the inside. Yeah. If not, then the safer route is simply this. Make sure if there's a victim in your humor, if there's a butt of the joke you're making, it's you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if I can laugh at myself and invite other people to do it as well, that goes a long way toward building connections and building trust. That's the reason why leaders who they're able to use some humor and poke a little fun sometimes at their own little weaknesses and very human foibles, you know, that it is something that other people look at, and instead of it eroding their trust and say, well, I thought they were flawless and perfect, they instead go like, wow, there's a little bit of myself that I can recognize in that leader, and that makes me more likely to follow him or her.
I think you're exactly right. I love your caveats of really understanding, because for some people are in very high stress jobs, allows them to cope with it. And, you know, are you part of that group or not? Because if you make a joke and you're not, that really creates a division versus the other side if you're part of the inside. So, and then of course, you know, if the joke is going to be called on someone, you never want to use someone in your audience or your team or that part of it, because then again, it creates that divisiveness versus that fun that's there.
Right.
Now,
well, and one other thing I just wanted to mention, because you do talk to a lot of folks in leadership, and that is humor has a direction that if you are, you can aim it upwards at power. Power must never aim it down at, you know, the followship. It cannot aim it down at those who have less power, because one way is a way of kind of keeping power in check, right? But when you use it the other way, then that's bullying.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people kind of forget that. They get into a position of power and they think they're joking, and they're really creating victims. You know, just take a look. Does my humor require a victim? And if that's true, rethink that. Yeah.
Good point. Dave, I tell you, we could probably go on, but I've got one last question before we jump into the recharge round, because I'm curious, because you're a guy that uses humor a lot and a funny individual. But of course, I know you get this question all the time, but I have to ask it because I'm sitting on this end being the interviewer. You know, when that person says, oh, so you're a funny guy, tell me something funny.
So what's my response to that?
Yeah.
Well, I ask them what they do, and then I ask them to perform that for me. You know, I'm a plumber. Great. Sweat some pipe for me. I want to see that right now. It's really funny because when somebody says humor, it is the one thing that you are required to produce on demand.
Yes.
No, if you meet a surgeon and you're like, hey, cut somebody open, would you? You know,
Right.
I've got to see this for myself. So yeah, I mean, there is, you know, sometimes there is that kind of funny on demand, and it does put pressure because, you know, all humor is contextual. It's not something that you can just kind of call up. I don't tell jokes, you know, I'm not a joke teller. I tell stories. And so, you know, organically, you just kind of come, sometimes there's an application, you know, there's a context where, yeah, I'll tell you a story. But when we really think about humor, you know, what it is I think a funny thing, because I think one thing is, look, when I talk about humor, naturally, I grew up in a home where we were laughing together. We were, you know, humor was a high premium placed on it. And I did stand up and I wrote comedy and I did these things. I performed it. But a lot of people who are not funny, that they would describe themselves as, I'm a funny person, they think, well, how in the world does that do me any good? And I think, well, you can use the primary humor response. And Gary, do you know what the primary humor, what's the first thing you do in a humor situation?
Laugh.
And
Get
you know,
involved.
most people say that, and you think about it, you think, that's true. There are a lot of people who, they go from dead serious to, but creepy, right? That's supervillain stuff, right? Most of us go through this little transition, and that transition is what? The first evidence that you have humor is that smile, right? And primary human response is a smile. Then we laugh, right? And if you've ever been in a situation where, you know what, medical science, I'm convinced, still doesn't understand what laughter is. I was reading an article one time about laughter research. There actually is such a thing. It's a field called gelotology. And they talked about these test subjects that they made laugh. And they said they exhibited a respiration pattern consistent with laughter. I said, respiration pattern? That's not what laughter is. It's a force of nature, right? I mean, have you ever been in a situation where it's really inappropriate to laugh, and yet you must laugh, right? Have you ever had that, Gary?
Normally, no.
No? Well, most of us have been in a situation where it's just that really inappropriate context, and you try to hold it in, and you got to be careful because, frankly, it will find another exit, and it takes stuff with it. It's horrible. So we laugh, and then the laughter gets wilder. It gets violent. And if you've ever been in a violent fit of laughter where you're just unable to breathe, tears stream down your face, you're rocking back and forth, you're begging the person making you laugh, stop, right? And then finally, you lose bladder control, right? And that's the progression, stage 1 through stage 4. And that's what I'll tell my audience. I say, listen, if I can bring an audience to incontinence, I feel I've won. But it begins with that primary human response, just a really genuine smile that affects the entire face. And that's something any of us can put in to practice in our interactions with other people. That primary human response, it creates connections and it makes people feel just a trust and a connection to you in that moment. And it brings joy to that moment.
Yeah. And it opens people up to be able to really hear a message.
Absolutely.
Even better, because otherwise they're still in their mind. And if they're in their mind, sometimes people can close off, where when you get that smile and you know that they're listening, then they're coming forward and they're willing to receive that message. And I think it really could really be a benefit for some of our leaders to realize that they first have to bring people into it. And for some people, it's via humor. Some people, it's via story. And you kind of have the combination of both, which I think is excellent. Right. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I just had to ask that question. I was like, okay, we got a funny guy that always gets asked, so you got to throw that out there. But let's jump into the recharge round before we complete here. And we talked some about this already. So the first one, how do you believe your mindset affects your daily living?
Well, I think if you think of your mindset, we talk about that word a lot, but to really understand it, I think it's simply, you could use kind of just a radio analogy. When you tune in a radio, here's this entire band of frequencies. You twist that dial, there's every type of music and talk and conversation and opinion that's available on that. But it really is a matter of what have you tuned it to. So you're going to receive what it is, you're going to perceive what you receive. So if you want to change your mindset, you really just think of it as it's changing what you receive, your reception. And so if I'm tuned to a negative frequency, then I'm going to have that negative programming. And if I'm tuned to a more positive frequency, then that's going to be a different result. So to me, it's just a matter of, look, mindset is just what are you tuned to? And what you tune into, that's going to be the result that you're going to get.
Yeah, becomes really a key of what results are you looking for. And again, going back some of that positive we talked about putting in your life, you're going to be able to get that. And it kind of falls with my second question is because what do you do daily, Dave, to bring that energy in your life? And let's use the example. It's easy on days we're doing podcasts because we like to speak or we're on the stage.
Yeah.
But how about in a day where you feel like you don't have the energy? What do you do to be able to generate that energy that you need?
Well, you know what? This is where I have to count my blessings because my wife and I have been married for many years, and we have this wonderful ability when I'm home, when I'm not on the road, and these days she's able to go with me a lot of these places. We sit down, we have coffee. And I think, sometimes we talk so much in big, grandiose kind of it's positivity and it's setting goals, and all those things are very good. But we forget that it's the small pleasures in life that we pay attention to. And if we pay a real joyful attention to those things, that is a source of energy. When I sit down with my wife, Susanna, and we have our coffee in the morning, and then we talk about how nice that is, and we laugh together and we plan our day. She's a material part of our business. And so we'll make our list, and we talk about things, and we express gratitude, and we say our prayer of thanks together in that morning moment. That's a habit every single day that brings me energy. And I think, it's the small things that if we'll pay careful attention to the small things, that it's humor, good humor, it's expressing gratitude, and it's really connecting with the people who make your life what it is and worth living, who you do it all for.
Yeah, well said. How about the number one connection, or maybe it's a relationship that's made the biggest impact on your life?
Well, when you say connection, I will go back and looking back over, I was a teacher for a number of years, and then I started doing stand-up comedy, and that led me to meet a fella named Phil Sorrentino. And Phil was a motivational speaker in the traditional, he was full of energy and passion. And he's the one who really first gave me the opportunity. And he said, Dave, there are some times that I can't be available to do this. He said, listen, you laugh. He says, you make people laugh, and you teach. And he said, that's really what I do. He said, I think you could do that too. And so he gave me that opportunity. And so I've been grateful for the past 20 plus years that one conversation, that connection, allowed me the entrance into what I've found has been my passion and joy to do for the last 2+ decades.
It's always amazing, Dave, how that one individual can make such a difference in people. And a lot of times they don't even know at that time that they're doing it, and they're able to say it. And I think that's the thing I would really tell our chargers is you have that capability on people. It may be your son or daughter, or it may be someone that you work with, but you have that capability with people. So thanks for reminding us about that.
Absolutely.
How about what advice has influenced you the most in your life?
Well, I mentioned earlier that one quote by Arthur Ashe, which I think has been, because there have been different ones over the course of my life that have played more of a role in that era. But the one that really is just speaking to me and has for the last few years is that one simple piece of advice that you are more powerful than you think, because you can start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. And I think that is a wonderful, empowering piece of advice that's so simple that it gives me energy each moment to say, you know what, I could make a difference here. And so, I believe in just asking yourself this one simple question, that if we will ask this question and have it in the forefront of our mind in every interaction and in every effort that we make, in every connection with another person, what can I do? That's it. Just simply, what can I do? What's available to me right now that I could be of some service? I could be part of a solution to a problem. I could be part of raising somebody else up. I could be part of, helping someone feel more positive about the work they do, or what they're capable of. What can I do? And so I think that, hey, wherever you are, whatever you've got, share that, because you can make a difference.
Excellent. Well said. How about your favorite book, and share why you love it?
Well, I know that we're at the beginning part of the year. And so actually, I'm an English teacher. I was an English teacher for years. So I love a lot of the wonderful books. One of the best ones that I ever read was one of the shortest ones, because it was, again, I love simplicity. Tom Rath's How Full Is Your Bucket? And I just think, because he brings it down to such a portable concept of every interaction we have with another person, it's either a plus or a minus. So if we just think in those terms, we need more pluses than we do minuses. How are we filling other people's emotional buckets, and the difference that makes? So I love that one. I love, there's a book by Lawrence Gonzalez called Deep Survival: Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why. And it says, I go back to that over and over again because it explains so much about how our minds work to create our ability to thrive. And he talks about it in a very real way, which is in survival situations where people have found themselves, marooned or adrift or in a crashed airplane on a mountaintop. And those people who survive, his conclusion was simply this: they stay attuned to what's going on right then. They don't get mired in the past, right? They don't sit and worry about what's going to happen to them next. They stay very present in the moment. And then the other thing is they have someone that they're doing it for, someone they're surviving for. So I love that one. But above all of those that are wonderful nonfictions, the most instructive one for me has always been A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, simply because it's a tale of redemption. And in it, there's a character that I think we overlook all the time. We always look at the character of Scrooge, right? Bob Cratchit. But we forget about Scrooge's first boss. Do you remember him? I'm going to quiz you.
I think you got me.
Yeah. Well, okay. He did have an unusual name. And it was Mr. Fezziwig. And Mr. Fezziwig was his first boss. Now, he was very unlike what Scrooge became because he was joyful. He shared with his people. He had a celebration with them. And they, he thought warmly of him. But I thought, you know what? That's why he was able to make the redemption turn, because he had this model early on. Somebody who was in leadership, who showed him, here's what you do. You do it with joy. You do it with service. You do it with a smile. You make, and his when the ghost of Christmas past asked him why he's pouring out so much praise on this old boss, she says, he hasn't spent much for this little celebration. But he says, it isn't that. He says, he has the power to make our work light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. He said, say that his power lies in words and looks and things so slight that you can't even add and count them up. So what? The happiness he gives is the same as if it had cost a fortune. And what he was capturing there was the difference between the transactional leader and the relational leader. And so no matter what time of year it is, I go back to that as my inspiration, that it's all about relationships.
Yeah, relationships make the big difference in us, whatever we're doing, whenever we're doing it. So it becomes one of those real keys. I mean, this relationship came because Dave and I met at a national speakers conference, and that's how I was able to ask him to come on to the podcast. And I've had so many guests that have said yes, and it's a relationship that kind of gets started from somewhere having a conversation with them. And we were both at the same speaking conference and started talking to each other and had that conversation and asked him, I said, I have a podcast. Would you be willing to join us? And of course, he said yes.
And then you actually followed up on it. Thank you, Gary.
That's right. Now, my last question for you, and you most made it through the recharge round. In one sentence or less, what legacy do you want to leave the world?
In one sentence or less. I like the less. Every time when I was growing up, every time I'd come home and I'd tell my mother, who was just one of the funniest people I ever met in my life, I would tell her something I'd said, and something that I thought was kind of clever. Her answer, her question that she always had was, "Did they laugh?" She always asked me that. And I told her, I said, Mom, one day I'm going to write a book, and it's just going to be called "Did They Laugh?" And it's going to be all about. And so, I think yes, they laughed. I want them to, when someone thinks about, hey, Dave, hey, he made us laugh and he made us think, and he made a difference.
Well, you have definitely done that today. You've made us laugh. You've made us help understand how humor can affect our mindset and our life and our positivity that we want to bring forward. And you've made a difference to each one of our chargers. And Dave, I just can't thank you enough for sharing your knowledge, your expertise with our audience. And please share with them how they can connect with you. If they want to connect with you, you can give your website, whatever information you'd like to be able to share.
Sure, very good. It's very simple. DaveCaperton.com. It's all one word, DaveCaperton.com. That's my website. Connect with me on LinkedIn by that name, and my Twitter feed is Speak of Joy, and you can also reach out to me. I love to hear from people one-on-one. So call my office, and it's very simple. Area code 740, Joyful Lee. That's Joyfully. So it's I'd love to hear from your listeners.
Well, great. I truly appreciate you doing that and sharing, and we'll have all that in show notes. So if you're active right now on your podcast and you can't write it down, remember, go to chargepodcast.com and we'll have all those details there, all the books that they've recommended, as well as his contact information, his website, all that information. Please check him out. There's some great videos that he has on his website that you'll want to check out, and some great information. And maybe some of those times that you need that pickup, well, you've got a place to go to be able to receive that, and along with it, a message that he's sharing there each and every day. Dave, again, we can't thank you enough for sharing with us, making us have some humor in our life, and allowing us to laugh some and enjoy the conversation. So thank you for joining us here on the Charge Podcast.
Thank you, Gary. It has been my privilege and pleasure.
Chargers, I hope you go out and you smile more today, you laugh a little more today, and you give someone else the gift of humor today. Maybe in that situation, that's one of those tough situations, you bring that humor into their life and allow it to lighten the moment and allow the people to really be able to respond and take that smile. As we know, there's health benefits to smiling, to laughing more. How are you going to put that into your life? That's my question to you, to bring that humor forward. Maybe it's automatic. You're pretty easy at it. Maybe you're one of those individuals and you say, I'm not that funny of a person. Well, start bringing the stories that allow you to bring that humor forward. I thank you for joining us here on the Charge Podcast. Come back next week and we'll have another great guest for you. Remember, like and share this and let your friends know about the Charge Podcast, because that's how we get more listeners. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here next week, same time. Make it a great day.
This podcast is ended, but your life doesn't just stop. To continue your inspiring journey, head over to chargepodcast.com and access all the tools and resources mentioned on today's show. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing with somebody who may also benefit from the advice provided. That's chargepodcast.com. Until next time, charge in business and life.